All right, welcome back to another episode of Epic Meta Podcast. George, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
Good. Actually, wake up early for the show today, or earlier than normal. So it's on my second cup of coffee, and did some pre-work, I suppose. But topic for today is actually really, appropriate for our podcast. It's very meta. We're gonna talk about podcasts. Things that we like about it and a little bit about the medium itself, I suppose. Um, why don't we start with you? When did you start listening to podcasts?
That's a good question. It's been a few years now. I don't
Mm,
remember exactly when I first started listening to them, but I took to
mm.
them pretty quickly because, for one thing, I have two jobs, and a lot of the tasks assigned or associated with those jobs are somewhat mindless. So it's nice to have something on in the background
Mm.
to keep my mind occupied. Um, and I also try and do 10,000 steps every day. So it's nice to have something to
Ah.
listen to while I'm doing that. And I even listen to them when I go running too. So
Mm. Yeah, I do that sometimes, but since I put all physical exercise to a pause since like a year or two now. And also when I do way back, when I do exercise, typically like to music instead of podcasts. Occasionally I do audiobooks and podcasts, but typically is music because I need the momentum or energy level. I feel that it affects me differently, but that's cool. Do you remember your first podcast that you kind of listened to more than the other ones?
I
Like
think,
your first.
yeah, I think the first podcast I listened to was Mike Duncan's History of Rome.
Mm.
So there were, I don't know how many episodes there are. He finished.
Mm-hmm.
He finished several years ago.
Mm.
And then he inspired other people to take on other similar projects. So I'm currently listening
Mm.
to the history of Byzantium, which sort of takes off right where the history of Rome ends. Um, but yeah, that was probably the first podcast that I really got into.
Interesting. Did you come across that as you were listening to, another radio show or came across like a YouTube video to talk about that podcast? Do you remember how you figure it out?
Um, I've always been a Roman history buff. Like, that's just a topic I'm very interested in.
Mm.
So I think I don't remember exactly how I found it, but I might have been researching something about Roman history, on the internet. We call it research. I'm just like doing a Google search, but that probably came to my attention through that, but I don't specifically recall.
Yeah. I think mine was my I guess signing on with podcasting was about the same time frame, maybe a few years ago. I remember reading Freakonomics book. I don't know if you ever read that book before,
I haven't
but
read it, but I've definitely heard of it.
yeah, I think it's right up your alley. Um, so I really liked it, and then didn't even know for a while later. There's all these podcasts I didn't really care about, and it's just like, what is this? For my first impression, it's like, why? What is this? I don't get it. I think in a sort of way you kind of latched on to radio show. I think that's the closest medium to it. Way back when there was, radio show, people tune in at a certain time to listen to a certain radio show that they like.
Hmm.
Uh, I would compare. That's the very similar. If all media were families, podcasts and radio shows are very closely related or aligned to each other. And so I came across the idea of podcasts. I think just the normal internet. People always reference or try to commercialize or share or advertise their podcast, and then figure out that the author of Freakonomics had a podcast. So instantly start listening to it, and that's in my go-to for most of the time. That said, I consume movies and TV shows much more. So the podcast more like when I'm stuck driving somewhere, let's say for an hour or on a longer trip, um, and then listening to music is kind of bore me out. I would switch to podcasts because to me, at least for me, the podcast I listen to requires a lot of energy and attention.
Mhm.
And so driving is something that I can do that um, is kind of automatic. But as far as like for work and stuff like that, unfortunately, I really can't because I have to be kind of focused on my work. And if I listen to podcasts, I have to keep rewinding it because I would lose track and not understand what the podcast was talking about.
Yeah, if I'm
But
working
yeah.
on something that requires attention, I can't. I either need to put on a podcast that's about, a light topic,
Mm,
that I don't doesn't require me to, pay close attention, or I could put on music or nothing at all, depending on
hmm
what I'm doing. So,
Yeah.
so
So
what
yeah,
what
Mike
is
Mike Duncan.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What is Freakonomics about? What is that podcast about?
So Freakonomics is the same line of the book, which is I would say it's about economics, but more encompassing, right? So the both of the authors, I think it's just one now maybe, but both of the authors were economics professor, and so they wrote the book. And in their research, what they did was take economics but expand it to psychology and of course sociology as well. And they noticed certain trends and patterns that explain certain things. Uh, it's really hard to summarize it because I'm not an economics major. I'm not even a psych major or sociology major, and so what it does, it explains things that happen in our society using economics and linking certain things. And so it's very at the time I thought it was revolutionary. Like everybody, this needs to be taught. And so later on, now what the podcast does is, every episode is a different topic. Maybe sometimes they even rewind an episode and they have like a second version. But typically, it is about economics theory and policy, how it impacts us. And then, they have a lot of interviews. They talk to other because they're PhDs and famous authors, they have a lot of access to different people,
Mm-hmm.
and so they interview and of course talk about share the research that these people find out, and so it's very very educational for me because I this is not my focus or studies, and a lot of time I get burned out by statistics. Like that's my that's my kryptonite. Statistic and math. It's just like it just no, I don't function well. And so they do a lot of that background research on the podcast and in the book to kind of further our understanding of why certain things take place. So, for example, the last episode they talk about economic welfare and jobs, talk about policy in our current system, and then concepts like universal basic income. But yeah, I mean they're on episode 420 or something like that. So it's a lot of they've been doing it for a while.
Is it a weekly
So
podcast?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. Uh, don't know. I don't listen to it like all the time. So what I do is basically, you know, laundry or something like that. I'll just turn it on, see what episode that I miss, or usually there's like a gap of like, the last time I listened to will be like 5 new episodes. So I don't know their timeline, but I do know I don't listen to it like every week like I assume other listeners do. So I assume it's very constant, either weekly or bi-weekly. They have a show out.
And it's
Um,
all about the economy
uh,
and human behavior, I guess.
yeah. I mean, they don't go into like like our podcast. Like they don't go to they don't talk about like no. It's mostly about science, economics, and human behavior all tied together, and how we you know certain policy is not effective and certain things affect uh, certain human behavior.
It
So yeah, it's all around that try area. But yeah, pretty interesting. So yeah.
the impression I get is that having never listened to it or read the book, the impression I get, I guess, based solely on the title, is that there's standard economic theory, and their point is that there's other factors at play that
Pretty
that
much.
standard economic theory doesn't really pay attention to.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, if the book is an easy read, if you pick it up, you can't put it. It's like for me, when I picked it up, I couldn't put it down. I had to keep reading it until I was done with it, and I wanted more. And so what they do is they tap into other parts of our society and notice certain patterns. So, for example, I don't know if you like read this article or heard about it. It's about, I think it was the 90s. NYPD started doing a thing where they just start painting over graffitis. I don't know if you remember this, but
Hmm.
and they noticed that when you start painting over graffitis instead of letting it go, certain other crime-related trends also diminish. And so the smallest thing have the biggest impact instead of like trying to catch criminals or do other things. Of course, you still do need to do that, but they notice certain trends and patterns like that, for example. And then there's other examples in the book that you would think the two things never related, but by doing push one button, the system spit out different results on the other end through our social stuff, and not just crime, economics. It's all interconnected, and that's what they do. They expand on just economics trying to be supply and demand, and commerce being the resolution for everything. They also extrapolate from that and bring forth research that people do that you might not be aware about. Stuff like that. Pretty. I don't know. For me, it's pretty interesting. So, and somehow they always have new topics they talk about, and that's pretty cool to me too. Yeah. Yep, yeah. So, other than Mike Duncan, what I took it, Mike Duncan's is, I guess, a podcast or radio show that ends. Would that be fair to say?
Well, his podcast was on the history of Rome, so he started out, um, with the founding of Rome in the era when there were kings, and
Now,
and he went all
yeah.
the way to the fall of the Western Empire in 476.
Now, does he interview other people, or why would anyone listen to it? Like, I guess, what's your pitch? Other than him just literally telling you the history of Rome,
Yeah,
is it more, multiple researchers or anything like that? Any interviews?
there might be some interviews. I don't remember because it's been a few years. But basically, yeah, it's like taking a history course, where like one class they discusses a period, and then the next class chronologically discusses the next period.
Mm,
He had a kind of a unique delivery too, which was, I guess, lent something to the podcast. It gave it more personality than I
mm,
guess the subject matter might appear. I don't know. I mean, first, I am interested in Roman history, so for me, it was great.
right.
I love hearing that history
But did
told
he?
over and over again. And he went into considerable detail. So yeah.
Right, gotcha. So, would he, like, is it like lecture format, or did he just literally read you a book? Like today's topic is like he was teaching a fake class, with no audience. Was that kind of like the format?
It was kind of like a lecture, but he had sort of a
Mm,
casual style. So
mm,
it didn't sound like a professor talking to
mm.
you. It just sounded like a kind of sort of sarcastic guy kind of talking about
Gotcha.
the history of Rome. And I don't know, it worked.
Gotcha.
I'm not
Yeah. Did he have a co-host? Because
no,
I imagine it.
it
Wow.
was just him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Maybe I'll give it a shot one of these days when I'm super bored or something. Typically, I just look for a movie or TV show, but I'll take a look into that. So what other podcast that you really like?
Okay, well, when that podcast ended, he ended with the fall of the Western Empire. But if you know anything about Roman history, there was the Eastern Roman Empire survived until the year 1453. So that another 1,000 years of history, and that's typically referred to as the Byzantine period.
Mm.
And so another podcaster, Robin Pierce, started the history of Byzantium, and he was heavily influenced by Michael Duncan. He even states in his first episode that his intention was to continue where Michael Duncan left off. So I'm listening to that. That's those episodes come out typically on a weekly basis. There's two other history podcasts that I listen to. I listen to the Civil War podcast, which is a history of the Civil War, and it's done by this husband and wife team. The husband has a northern accent, and the wife has a southern accent, and they sort of switch back and forth. And currently, they're in the Battle of Gettysburg. So I don't know if you're interested in that.
No. It sounds to me like I rather just watch a movie if I'm ever interested in any of those topics. But do they read like letters from soldiers to their wives, or what are they actually?
Yeah.
Are they just talking to each other in two different characters, or what is the, I guess, framework or format?
So they
because yeah.
So they explain the narrative, the historical narrative, what's going on at this point. They do read letters that were written, from various people.
That's cool. Okay.
They do. I think they're both professional historians, or they have master's degrees in history.
Yep.
And so they know the procedure behind, historical research, whatever that is. And
yep.
And so,
have you ever seen like World War II in color, like the documentary or anything like that? It's a TV show. It's not a podcast.
Okay. I might have seen a little bit of it. So,
well, with any documentary about history, usually they do a timeline. So, for example, like let's say a war or something, they'll do, this is what happened on this side of, one force, and this is what's concurrently also happening on the other side, and this is what that, let's say, general or certain force is thinking. And so that to me, that is what's intriguing. So you can tell, on certain battlefronts or on a certain scale, what people were kind of somewhat analyzing each other to determine, how they could win the battle or whatnot. And so that when I watch those documentaries, the ones that intrigues me to keep watching versus turning away are the format and the framework is like that. So it's not always just this is the timeline and this is what happened. It just, to me it's exhausting and I just turn away. But it sounds like that's what they do is very, very interesting. Perhaps I'll what was the title again of that podcast?
The Civil War podcast.
Now, does it end like some of the other podcasts you already liked?
Well, it's currently ongoing. Yeah, I assume they'll go through the end of the Civil War and possibly into Reconstruction, but they're not there yet. They're at the Battle of Gettysburg.
Wow, sounds like they're very detailed.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're on like part 10 of just the Battle of Gettysburg.
Wow. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's a podcast for me. Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, I like detail, but Christ, that's super focused in on certain aspect.
And this is just the free version too. Apparently, you can, if you support them, then there's a whole other slew of episodes that they do just for the people who pay money.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean, right now, I think they're on episode 300 or something, close to between 200 and 300. but there's
Wow.
several hundred other episodes that if you support
That's
them,
kind of amazing,
yeah.
but I guess if you're like a historian PhD and then yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. But no, it's yeah, I like things that kind of just more broader and have more impact, I suppose, or direct impact to certain things I'm trying to understand in the economy or anything like that. But history, I guess I like the things that ends more, like the uh, certain shows or TVs or movies, and just give me, give me the quick synopsis or the dramatic, story behind certain things. But as far as like actually going through history, I don't think that was ever my thing.
And
But
it sounds like you don't want to be on the hook or compelled to listen to something on an ongoing basis. You want to dip
I,
into it when you have the time, but if
yeah,
but you
yeah,
don't want to take on the
like an
burden
anthology.
of listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this what's funny is on the podcast format that doesn't work, but on a TV show format, it totally works for me. Like my psychology, or because maybe I'm a very visual person, um, I don't like things that are anthology. So there's a lot of TV show recently that are very anthology based.
What do you mean by
So
that?
kind of like anthology is like the Twilight Zone. I don't know if you've ever seen Twilight Zone,
Yeah.
where there's no backstory. Each episode is different.
Oh, okay.
Um,
So like Dark Mirror and stuff like that.
yeah, Black Mirror
Oh, Black
is an
Mirror.
anthology. Yeah, anthology. So stuff like that don't work for me really well because I like to consume TV shows kind of like the same format that you brought about this podcast. I need it to be continual,
Hmm.
and I will like certain episode more than like certain other episode. But when I watch TV, when I say TV, is the new medium with like Netflix and subscription and whatnot. I like them to have a continuum so I can and finish it out, almost like perfectionist or something. But it's much easier for me to do that now. Whereas a podcast, I guess I have to find one that talk about certain topics I like, and
Mhm.
then I can continue to listen to that. But I think my investigation or experience into podcasts is very limited at this time to bring one up that
So this is interesting.
does that.
Thing. Like I have a hard time watching TV if I'm not uh, either drinking alcohol or doing something else. Like I can't just
Mm,
sit down and watch. It's very hard for me to do that.
yep. Mm,
Like movie theaters, I can do that. I can sit through a movie.
mm,
Um, but I'm trying to watch Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I
mm,
can't. It's a good movie. I like it, but I just can't get through it. Like I'm watching it in little chunks.
mm.
Whereas,
I haven't seen it either. And Tarantino is very, I would say he's very an acquired taste.
yeah.
So it's only for certain people. Now I do like some of his other stuff.
Well,
Doesn't mean that
hold
you
on.
like
I
everything.
was making a point here.
Yeah. Sure.
Don't derail my point. So it seems like you can sit and watch a TV show and fully invest yourself in it, but you can't listen
Hmm.
to a podcast and fully invest yourself to it. It seems like I'm sort of the opposite. Like
Well, to be fair, yeah, I see. I see that point. It's very dynamically opposed. But to be fair, each of us haven't investigated in the other medium that much either, right? So like,
what do you mean?
I'm not sure how you even find out about this history podcast unless you were a history buff like yourself, right?
Mhm.
For me, I have to be bombarded with advertisement before I find out about certain podcasts, and then I'm also judgmental about them before even trying to listen. Whereas for TV show, like let's say you recommend me a TV show, I'll go check it out right now. I'll watch, 3 episodes of it,
Mhm.
and then determine immediately, nah, it's not my thing. Whereas for a podcast, you can recommend it to me, and then I just never do it. So it's like I think the medium itself, narrow my my choices or I guess time as far as like entertainment, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different medium, do different things. Yep, yep. Very interesting.
So there's one more history podcast that I listen to, but
Mm,
it comes out very infrequently. It's called Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. And so he did this. Right now, he's doing a history of the war in the Pacific during World War II. Um, but like his episodes come out like once every 4 months or so. But the episode
mm.
itself will be like 4 hours long, and it's
Jeez.
just him talking. But
Wow.
he's got like a pretty cool delivery. And I
Mm,
don't know. I find it compelling. So he did a past series on World War One, which I thought was really interesting.
mm-hmm.
And it was like, I don't know, maybe 6 episodes, and each one was like 3 or 4 hours long.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
he has a way of delivering history that is compelling because it's he talks about details that aren't really covered in the normal channels
Mm,
that people would. He goes into considerable detail. I don't know.
yeah.
It's worth checking out if you're into which you're
Yeah.
not.
I think,
But maybe one of our audience
yeah, one of
members,
our two listeners.
Maybe Scott Markowitz will listen.
Yeah, the other ones I listen to, not as dedicated to, are actual also radio shows, but their format as far as podcasts make them much more, I would say, consume whenever you have time kind of format is The Hidden Brain. You ever heard of Hidden Brain before?
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So that's another one that I really like, and it's very, very closely to Freakonomics, but it's different. And they do a lot of research. They talk to a lot of different, I guess, expert in their industry, expert in, but this is much more psychology than economics. It's just a lot of, thinking fallacy and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's not theme, so it's just ongoing kind of like news, radio. Um, every week or every other week is different and new topic. So yeah, no background story or anything like that from one of your other one. Do you listen to anything else other than this history podcast?
Yes, I do. So
What are the other? Yep.
there's a couple of news podcasts that I listen to. I listen to NPR Politics. I
Mm,
listen to 538 Politics, and
mm.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is it's sort of a podcast
Yeah.
rebroadcast of the show that they do on Sunday.
Okay. Is he a newcaster? Is he a journalist? Stuff. Why do I know that name?
So he
George.
was the chief of staff for Bill Clinton, George Stephanopoulos, and then he,
Stephanopoulos.
I guess,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I
Okay. I
guess he
see
went
his face now.
into broadcasting after that.
Okay. So he was an anchor on TV for a while, and now he's has a podcast, I suppose.
No,
Interesting.
I don't, I don't know that he was an anchor. Was he?
Yeah, I'm looking at Wikipedia.
Oh,
He
okay.
was on well, I don't know how long, but he was an anchor on ABC, Good Morning America, This Week. So multiple shows. He
Okay.
was an anchor. Um, so yeah, and then he did uh, yeah, Democrat. So he did both, I suppose, one after the other. But interesting. So is it all news every week or
So, I
politics?
mean, yeah, that show is basically, the big stories in the news for whatever the week was prior.
Mm.
And then they have like a round table of
Oh,
political
cool.
pundits that, discuss both sides, the left and the right side, and what the particular arguments are.
Wait, so is he still on TV?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just like the audio version
Yeah.
then. Would that be fair to say? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, cool.
This week is on Sunday morning. I'm
Gotcha.
not sure what
Okay.
network. And so
Cool.
that's a weekly podcast. Daily news is covered by NPR Politics, which
Mm.
I listen to. And then the 538 Politics is more of a, it's a political talk show, but 538 does a lot of polling and statistics. So
Mm-hmm.
they sort of take that angle on the whole thing.
Is there like a crew or just like one host or
No,
two hosts that's always running the
no,
show?
there's a crew. There's about,
Mm.
I don't know, 5 different people.
Mm.
That,
And so is it like shorter episode then? Because they kind of just, or is it longer and they debate certain things?
it's like a half an hour to an hour, and it doesn't come out daily. It's maybe twice a week, something like that.
Mm. Yep.
Are you interested
Gotcha.
in politics, Tang?
I do, and I'm not. So for a long time, my position is, politics is just hogwash. But I say within the last 5 to 10 years, I started caring a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
especially with I want to say almost my generation, or possibly even some younger, are like people in their 30s and younger, participating and becoming representative and councilmen and even people being in the house. I forgot what they're called, representatives.
Mm-hmm.
So it changes my framework a little bit, and I take a look at issues more because everything is kind of intertwined, especially if you listen to like Freakonomics. There's a lot of politics on the back end that affects certain things, and so my framework changes. I know about 538, but I would just like go read an article real quick or something like. I didn't know they had a podcast, but maybe now it's easier to consume if they have a quick summary. That seems like something I'll probably like. Um, is to give you the statistic without you doing the math.
Yeah, they do that
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
There's a guy, Nate
So
Silver, who's on that podcast that he's pretty well known. And in fact, Nate Silver appears on This Week with George Stephanopoulos at
mm,
providing a statistical update.
yeah,
Um,
interesting.
yeah.
Cool. For entertainment area, do you
Yes.
is it just a history or what else you got?
So I listened to Joe Rogan. Are you familiar with Joe Rogan?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, he puts out a lot of content. I don't listen to all of his stuff. Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times he's interviewing stand-up comedians
Mm-hmm.
or MMA fighters. So I'm not too interested in those. Although every once in a while, if it's a comedian that I know
Mm-hmm.
or that I'm interested in, then I'll listen to.
Yeah.
But through listening to Joe Rogan, I found 2 other podcasts that I like. One is the Artificial Intelligence podcast, and that's hosted by a guy named Lex Friedman. And
Hmm.
Lex Friedman was a guest on Joe Rogan, so that's how I found him.
Yeah.
And he's an MIT professor, and he's works in the artificial intelligence realm, and he has a lot of really interesting guests on his podcast. And a lot of times, the science that they're talking about is so over my head that
Mm-hmm.
it's hard for me to understand sometimes. But I
Mm.
just like listening to people, of that intellectual caliber talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
maybe I pick up a
Yeah.
little tiny bit, but also just I
Yeah.
like the back and forth kind of banter and
Yeah.
yeah.
That sounds interesting. I definitely want to. I'm gonna listen to that now because that's the one thing that Joe Rogan does well is because his podcast is so diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't listen to all the time, but I would go on YouTube and watch it. And you probably see this in your kids, but I would be on my phone doing stuff, like looking for things
Mm-hmm.
while, like Netflix is playing on the background. And so it's like that kind of generation where which is constantly, attention is being pulled in multiple ways. But yeah, that's the thing that Joe Rogan does in regards to a talk show. I think his format is more talk show,
Mhm.
and so he has the opportunity to do interviews with almost, I would say, very random spectrum, because he goes from like artificial intelligence to universal basic income to MMAs, and then like ex Navy SEAL people. Like, it's very diverse, and so his audience is huge because people like different things, right? And
Mhm.
he gets a lot of followers through that, because every time we bring on a guest, it's somebody unique with a unique experience. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Cool,
So
cool.
included in this family of podcasts is
Mm,
the Portal by Eric Weinstein, and
mm.
and actually I had heard him on Joe Rogan's podcast at one point. Eric Weinstein.
What is the portal about?
Eric Weinstein is an MIT professor, I believe, and he's he does advanced mathematics.
Mm,
But he has. I only just started listening to him, so I don't have a complete feel for his podcast, but
mm.
he interviews a lot of different types of people, but he has a unique um, political uh, belief that, or he pointed out something that I found kind of interesting and didn't hear from any other source, and that is that the baby boomers, that generation,
Mm-hmm.
is like they sort of stolen from the other generations around them, and they're holding on to
Yep.
power, and they won't give it up. So,
Yep. It's a lot of problems with the baby boomers, but yeah, it's I guess that's cool, because I'm looking at his kind of website, and it talks about there's a blend of science, culture, business, and capitalism. So they basically
yeah,
covers economics and social things as well.
but
Interesting.
he's like a super smart person. So okay, I heard him on Joe Rogan, I think, but
Mm-hmm.
where he caught my eye or ear was when I heard him interviewed by Lex Friedman. I think
Mm,
he's been on both podcasts, and
yeah.
and so I guess it reached a critical mass where I was like, oh, I should check out him, and
Yeah.
so I did. So
Gotcha. Cool. Cool.
yeah, he's really
Do,
interesting.
do you follow any podcasts for comedians? Because comedians have podcasts now too. It's something I learned in the last like 3 months. I didn't know. I didn't know comedians have podcasts. And then somehow I was like one comedian to another, and I started like watching it on YouTube versus listening to them. And then I'll hop around here and there, but I don't. I'm not a fully invested to certain shows with podcasts.
Yeah,
Do you
I
have?
used to listen to Gilbert Gottfried's podcast.
Is that the guy with the voice?
Yeah, yes.
Interesting.
Which and it was good, but not good enough to stay in my regular rotation. So
Hmm.
even though it doesn't sound like it, I don't have infinite time to listen to podcasts,
Yeah.
and some of them have. So that this could be another topic that we discuss: podcasts that I stopped listening to.
Yeah, maybe we. Well, I can tell you right now, podcasts I don't listen to are ones where I don't get anything from. So, for example, with the ones you just already mentioned, I'm probably gonna start looking into Lex Freeman or the other gentleman that talk about artificial intelligence
Mhm.
a little bit more, because I'm really intrigued by that stuff I don't know, right? But I follow the same content on YouTube more because a lot of my work is in front of a computer, and so I'm working, sending emails and whatnot, uh, just in front of the computer. And if I take a break, I can leave my desk or I can just sit there. And what I do is, typically distracted and wanted to know something real quick, I'll do Google or watch a YouTube video that are very short time frame,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll go right back to work doing what I need to do. And so it's a constant thing with me. And so podcasts for me requires more, where I have to, just be dedicated to for that hour. So for comedians, I do listen to them, but typically I just stop or leave or not finish even that one single episode, because so far I've come across two, three comedians podcasts, and typically it's just about nothing, kind of like this show.
Yeah, yeah.
But this show, I think, to our or my, you know, why I would listen to the show. We actually does have a topic every episode. For the comedians, typically they just rambles about different things. I don't know how to describe it. It's just it's almost like hanging out with them offset, for lack of a better term, and just laughing with them about certain things,
Mm-hmm.
while they're crafting their full jokes. You can see the behind the scene, if I might say that. At least that's what it feels to me. So yeah, but did you stop listening to certain comedians that you liked?
Well, yeah. So I mentioned Gilbert Gottfried. I don't know. I like stand-up comedians, but I don't know that I want to listen to them on a
Mm.
podcast. So that, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. I mean, I guess, well, when I'm talking about, the work that I do, a lot of it doesn't require my full
Mm.
attention,
Mm.
which is somewhat disappointing. I mean, I would rather be doing a job that,
Mm.
challenged me in that area. I just, for some reason, I fell into what I'm doing now,
Mm.
but anyway, so I guess I want to listen to podcasts that do challenge me intellectually.
Mm.
And that's probably because, I mean, so it sounds like your job does challenge you intellectually, or at least
Oh yeah,
requires your full
attention.
attention.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's challenging in regards to intellectual. I just need to be there and pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'm on the phone a lot, and sometimes I'm not. But you have to be, for me at least, fully, invested in the time I'm being there. Now that's why I get tired, right? So that I get burnt out for, let's say, after an hour of work, I have to leave my computer and go downstairs, grab a drink, or just check out for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, I walk around the building if I was still working in the office or something like that, and come back in. And plus, coworkers are naturally distracting anyway, so that's they distract you from that. So it's a lot of de-stressing along with the workday. Whereas working from home, I have to make sure I checked out. And then the other problem is if I check out too long, I'm like, I don't want to go back.
Right.
And so that's your discipline matters a lot. And so for podcasts with listening on the background, like, yeah, Freakonomic is something I won't be able to do it maybe on like a slow day or something, or when I'm slowing down myself, but it requires, it sounds like a lot of like the AI podcasts that you listen to. It's just, it's out of my depth a lot. And it's just borderline right there out of my depth, because there's a lot of research that I'm just like, wow. Some people actually, that's what they research into. Very interesting stuff, and it's borderline right there. Artificial intelligence, definitely. There's YouTubers that I watch, and they have short versions of certain things I like, so it's not full blown. Now, is the Lex Freeman podcast hour long, or is it shorter, or what's
It
the?
can, I think it's typically an hour, but I think it can go as long as 2 hours sometimes.
Wow.
I think it just
Okay.
depends on who he's talking to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, that's the thing about podcasts. They don't really need to be a certain length of time. They can
Yeah.
go on and on. And okay, I guess we should go move to this one. Jordan Peterson. I listen to Jordan Peterson. Do you listen to him?
I've watched him on YouTube,
Yeah.
and I think he burns me out after I forgot what it was.
He's
But
aggressive.
after, yeah, I think he was aggressive, and then is he still an active teacher, like a professor of some college somewhere, or
I think he's just a
no?
full time lecturer. Like he goes around and gives
The,
lectures. I don't think
yeah,
he.
yes,
Yeah, I don't know.
interesting. So now he does have okay. So yeah, I think I followed him for a while, and then I think I was linked to something where it was 100% opposed to what I was thinking.
Mhm.
So I don't know, I just stopped listening because I'm like, all right, this guy's literally on the same track all the time. It's kind of exhausting to
He
me.
does retread familiar ground, but like
Mm,
right now on his podcast, and they're playing some old lectures that he did several years ago, but they're lectures on the Bible. So he
mm,
goes through the book of Genesis, um,
mm,
which I find really interesting. And he's a clinical psychologist, so, and I guess you could say philosopher. And so he and scientist, so he takes the psychology, philosophy, and scientific standpoint,
mm-hmm,
and looking at the Bible, because and it's easy to say, oh, the Bible, whatever, but it's a very, very dense, and there's a lot there. There's a lot there
mm,
in the book that most people would want to shrug off, but
yeah.
it, it's really, really interesting if to me it is anyway.
Mm. Yeah, I think I found him really interesting, and then I think it was on his political stance. That's where he lost me, and I just kind of left because I was like,
Do you remember what specifically he was talking about?
I think it was about climate, maybe, or something. But then I just stopped listening because I found, other things. Because I was like, so I found him on YouTube, and the thing with YouTube is, I'm just gonna find somebody else, like if you're gonna, have a talk or something, and then I haven't seen him with the algorithm. I haven't seen him pop up again,
Mm-hmm.
so he might be on another radio show or on another channel, but it hasn't popped up in my typically whatever I'm watching on YouTube. So with podcasts, it's different, right? Because when you subscribe, it alerts you and it tells you there's a new episode, so you can like go into it. Whereas,
He's been sick lately, actually.
mm,
He
so yeah, I think
his
yeah, it just hasn't popped up as frequently as other things that I consume. So I just to kind of wean off and then eventually kind of forgot about him, so to speak.
Yeah,
Yeah.
his wife had cancer, or
Mm,
still has cancer, and apparently he was experiencing a lot of anxiety about that, and he was prescribed some, like, a beta blocker drug. I can't
mm-hmm.
like something like Xanax, but not Xanax. And
Right.
apparently he tried to wean himself off of it and went through like serious withdrawal. And
Mm-hmm.
so he spent some time in rehab for that. But for some reason, the American rehab wasn't good enough, so he actually went to Russia to wean
Mm,
himself off, because they apparently have some treatment there that is not available in the United States. And,
mm.
and so he's just, this has been like almost a year, and
Ah,
like
okay. Yeah.
I think he's just now dipping his toe in the water again.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. I think I've come across him, but never realized he has a podcast either. So I never fully investigated or invest myself in his podcast. Just watching a few of his, I guess, YouTube videos,
It's good. I mean,
and then
he's opinionated. He has a particular style. Um, you know, he's controversial too,
yeah,
and
it's. I think that's the thing that's what turned me off because some of the things he say where it's outside your spectrum of expertise,
mm,
I'm just like, all right, whatever, dude. Like, unless you're climate change, you know, like PhD, this is not your field. But on psychology, yeah, sure, I'll listen to that. But so I think that's a lot of time, like podcast, unless it's yeah, unless you do different topics. Now, when you were listening to him, or since the last time you listened to him, is it basically episodic, or is it different research topics they talk about?
It's usually like a recording of him speaking before an audience, giving like an hour long lecture.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Cool.
and I guess one more point that I'd like to mention about him, he's sort of stands against political correctness, which is something that I definitely agree with, because I find political correctness stifling. I want people to be free to be creative and and be humorous without the fear that they might say something that would offend someone, and then and so it just creates a climate where people are afraid to say what they truly believe, and if we can't be truthful, then what kind of world is that?
Yeah, makes sense.
That's my 10-second rant on political correctness.
Do you listen to his I guess say counterparts or opposing people like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins or anything like that?
Well, I don't think they're opposed to him, but I used to listen to Sam Harris. That's in my category of podcasts I no longer listen to. And
same.
Sam Harris just started to annoy me. He's very I don't know,
in the weeds.
Well, that's not what annoyed me. It's more of his like the podcasts I stop listening to. Generally, I stop listening to them because the people themselves, on a personal level, annoy me. So Sam Harris definitely fell in that category. He's just very judgmental and very dismissive of people who don't agree with him.
Yeah, I listened to one episode, and so I try to give people a shot or whatever, but it just if it takes you 10 minutes to make a point, I'm already gone. If you're gonna talk about a certain point that's so minute in the whole debate or whatever, I'm like, okay, I'll just read your book, or write an essay and I'll read it or something. It's just too long. There's so many pauses, and it just is. If you can't hold my attention, which is why certain podcasts and certain mediums I'm more attracted to, like for example, video, like YouTube or Netflix.
Yeah.
The thing with audio, and I want to say, I don't want to say radio show or podcast, but yeah, if you drone on or even there's a pause after a second or two, it seems very, very long. Now, in a video format like YouTube, you can see the facial expression, you can see the eyes, and you can tell somebody's thinking or crafting a statement, so they want to be, correct.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot see that through audio. And so when I just was like, all right, I'm gone. And so I think it was only I can't express my opinion fair enough because I've only listened to maybe one or a few minutes of his podcast. So I can't not recommend or do recommend, but I do know he has one.
Yeah,
so
he's just very into himself, and he's very sure of himself when he's talking about philosophy. How can you be sure of that? And he's a staunch atheist.
Yeah. And that's why I liked him.
Dismissive of those people who are not atheists. So.
Right. So there's a spectrum, right? And I think over the time, at first I was attracted because of that, and then Richard Dawkins, and then I actually like comedians now more because there's certain comedians that, or I guess TV man, it's strangely it's comedians who actually out themselves more than, let's say, a movie star. I think they're afraid of losing audience maybe, or they're just not. But the two that I like or I think of is Ricky Gervais and Penn Oswalt, who are who are also atheists, but they're not jerks about it, and they don't have they don't have. I don't know if they have podcasts actually. I would assume somebody does, but they have specials or they have shows, and yeah, they brought up before in their shows or in their different entertainment mediums, whereas Sam Harris is very different flavor of it. And I tend to agree with you on that because he just, his energy is so uninviting, and so it's just very exhausting for me to like listen to him. Even if I find something I agree with, he takes way too long to convey it.
And he's the kind of person that when I hear talking, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't like me as a person.
I don't know about that, but what he does is put me to sleep. And so I'm like, all right, dude, I'm actually trying to be entertained here. So this is not the time for that. So most of the time I'm looking for something to stimulate me versus, going through a lecture. And so that's why it doesn't work. But yeah, it's no longer subscribed.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't add this podcast that I haven't mentioned yet, called actualized.org. Have you ever heard of that?
Nope.
So it's hosted by this guy, Leo Guerra, Guara. And he's just like a self proclaimed sort of spiritual guru in a sense. That's a bad way to describe him.
No, it sounds exactly correct to me. I mean, the website or the podcast is called actualize.org. So where else are you going to go with that? But okay.
So he talks a lot about like taking psychedelics and meditation and, what is the true nature of God and, all these very esoteric, is that the right word?
Metaphysical
topics. And I've listened to him for several years. And it actually, it's interesting to see how he progressed over the years, because he started out sort of as like a self-help kind of podcast, like, how to motivate yourself and how to have success and how to get girls and that sort of thing. And it's like slowly morphed into this, like, he's like become like this awakened Buddha sort of. I mean, it's really,
that makes sense though.
It's I don't know. I like it a lot. He's also kind of another person that I get the sense that he wouldn't really like me if he met me in person.
You have a lot of like double projection. And not only do you project, what you think the other person. I'm like, no, I never do that because I'm like, there's no way I know what someone else is thinking.
Sure.
You can guesstimate it, right? There's a good chance that you'll be correct because, you can guesstimate their person. But yeah, that's like double step projection. I just stop it like how I feel about somebody. And then I stop right there. I don't do that next step.
Yeah, I don't have the ability to not stop. You can blame that on my parents.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, yeah, I don't know if I listen to any podcasts that are even in that spectrum. I think psychology come pretty close to some of that stuff, but no, like I said, I just consume media different, and so it's not it doesn't come across. Have never heard of that, but I'm glad you're.
That's the magic of our podcast. We're like the odd couple.
Yeah.
And together, when we combined, we come up with something that neither one of us would come up with on our own.
Yeah, because the thing is, we're not pigeonholed. That's it. I was thinking about this when we were, I guess, prepping for this. I was researching and realized what's unique is kind of like the comedians and, where they interview hosts and they talk about their lives, I suppose, because we are not pigeonholed in certain genre, so to speak. If podcasts are like music and music have genre, then we're not pigeonholed that way. And so the benefit of that is that we can go anywhere with any topic. And eventually maybe have a guest and interview or whatnot, but it doesn't pigeonhole in that way, and so it can be, a variety show, so to speak. So
But
I do like that one function of it. Yep.
but then I guess we get into the territory of, so why would anyone want to listen to us?
why would why would people want to watch Seinfeld? When it came out, the first few years actually did really bad,
Oh,
but
it sucked. I only liked Seinfeld like in the last 3 or 4
yes,
seasons, maybe something like
yeah,
that.
season 6 to 9, I think, starting being way funnier,
Yeah,
but yeah, I don't know what happened. Maybe the writing just got better.
well,
So
yeah.
so
Larry David left at one point, and then
mm,
I think they stopped trying to like be so observational in their humor. Like here's a funny aspect of real life that nobody talks about, and then they just started like getting into crazy situations, which
yes,
was more fun.
because George as a character get into all these crazy situation that because now you know him as a character, or you kind of root for him to succeed knowing that he'll fail. I don't know. It's very interesting and very funny because he does crazy stuff.
I,
That
I love the episode where Kramer got the Merv Griffin set in his apartment. Did you ever see that one?
what is no, I don't remember.
Oh,
What is that? Is that like a whole TV show inside his apartment?
so Merv Griffin was this talk show host from the 1970s.
Oh yeah, and then when people come visit him, they had to
Yeah,
like he interview them.
so he found they broke the broken down set like in a
Mm.
garbage bin and like a dumpster, and so he brought it up to his apartment and reconstructed it in his living room. And so yeah, when people came into his apartment, he would interview them like as if they were a
Oh
guest on the show.
no, I think that must have been right. Yeah, it's one of those episodes that I missed because I remember,
You've got If you haven't
he
seen
got
that
like
one, see it.
mm, he has a bathtub in his apartment.
Yeah,
He got,
hot tub.
hot tub. Yeah. And so it's like, I think it was maybe right before or after that, but no. Yeah, it's just stuff like that. I think it's way more funnier. It's okay. We'll figure out what our niche is, I suppose, and we'll hone in on it as we go along. Gotcha.
Yeah. Well,
Yep.
we just completed an hour.
That's like a minute on free speaking or whatever that function was. I forget. But yeah, I want to bring up when you were talking about the podcast about self-actualize.org.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring up Fernarm Street again because
What's it
I
called?
went through Fernarm Street, the website. I
Fernam
linked it.
Street.
Yeah, I linked it to you on Teams,
Can you spell
so
it
you
for
can
our audience? Though?
Farnam. So it was the last episode I brought it up as well. And so I went through a phase where I read everything under the sun, and it was before podcasts came out with self-help and all that stuff. And so I went through, instead of podcasts, I went through, YouTube videos or books about some of that stuff. And then coming out on the other end, it's not something you finish, but it just, now that you went through a lot of the things repeat when you listen to it again, is the same core principle.
Mm-hmm.
What I like about Farnarm Street is they take that and they distill it to a core concept, right? And so once you understand the concept, you don't get burnout per se, but once you understand the concept, you don't necessarily sign up again and fully invest yourself to certain things. And that's yeah, I just thought of that when I was listening to this guy, because obviously for most I guess writers or podcaster or whatever they are, eventually it is a business. You do want to keep going, and so that makes that makes a lot of sense, because at some point you have to be finished.
Mm-hmm.
But as a concept, stuff like that, you want to keep going, and then there's really nowhere else to go except sign up to more class or purchase more things from me. Kind of, it's kind of like the end goal
So
or end point.
I also went through a self help phase. Maybe that can be
Mm,
a topic for the next episode. Self help
yeah,
stuff. Hey,
self-help books.
what have you read
maybe?
in that area?
Ooh, my God.
Tony Tony
Tony
Robbins.
Robbins. I think I've read. Have I read anything with Tony Robbins? I think my. Oh God, I can't even believe. Jim Rohn. Rohn. So I'm a big Jim Rohn fan. Went through a phase where I read his books. All the other ones that you can think of.
Think and Grow Rich.
Seven.
Have you read that?
Yep, Think and Grow Rich. 7 Habits.
Yep, I've read that.
Some of it I still have, but it just once you kind of understand the concept, you're like, oh yeah, this is what it was, and then
yeah, they overlap.
Okay.
They definitely overlap.
Yeah, I think we can maybe talk about the books for the next one, or things that we like from certain ones.
Let's do that.
Cool. All right, well, this is our episode about podcasts, or at least I think it's gonna be an episode 1. We'll have to revisit, maybe next year or next 6 months as to any other podcasts people should know about, or where we went from here.
Oh yeah,
I think this be.
It's constantly involved. The list that I listen to is constantly evolving. So.
Yeah, it'll be a good topic to revisit, but absolutely. All right, we want to sign off. You shout out to anybody out there. We're gonna do it every time. If we have guests, and it's like, do you want to shout out anybody?
Tang, do you have anything to plug?
No plugging at us at this point. Just keep listening and keep sharing our stuff. Thank you for visiting us wherever you find us, and look forward to reconnecting next time. Peace out.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hey, this is Tang here with the Epic Meta podcast team. Thank you so much for listening. Did you listen to the whole episode? Did you enjoy it? Were there things that we missed? Were there topics you would like for us to dive deeper into? And of course, what other topics should we discuss in the future? If you have any of these thoughts or comments, please share with us what you think and how you feel regarding the current episode, and of course, other ideas that you might have for future episodes below. As always, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, be good and be well.